This show is sponsored by Realtor Cynthia Bear, Putting Down Roots. Visit your in-town real estate specialist in Atlanta at cynthiabaer.com.
You are now tuned in to the Good Gracious Show. Welcome.
Howdy, Good Gracious family. It is Monday, October 1st, 2018. I'm Boyd Baker, here with the latest episode of the Good Gracious Show podcast. On this episode, I did some crazy stuff. Well, one, I sat in the front of Wonder Shop and spoke with Nikki Speed and the Phantom Callers, and we also played some music, and there was a little bit of noise, believe it or not, here in that Counter Park neighborhood. So I apologize for the random bits of pieces of real life, but consider it ambient. It's like you're living in the city. And, they played some great music there. We had a great chat. It was a good time. And then I also got to sit down with Angel Poventud and talk about Beltline transit. I don't know how much you know about the Atlanta Beltline, but it's a path that goes around the inside, in-town, midtown kind of area. It's about 22 miles. And it hasn't been completed all the way, but the concept is to create a greenway. And the whole idea was to create this greenway out of old railroad tracks so that space could be used for transportation, whether you're riding your bike or using a light rail. But it would give access to, I believe it's about 40 neighborhoods where you could just jump on and simplify things. Then you could catch it. Another train, a bigger train somewhere, or you can make a connection to a bus stop. So it just has incredible potential, and everybody's been talking about it. And Angel and I sat down last week and chatted about the importance of this for affordability, housing issues that are going on around there, as well as accessibility, and what's really possible and what would it mean for the city. So it's a fantastic discussion, and it's something we should all be talking about with our elected officials as well as with our neighbors to say, hey, we voted on this and have donated our tax money to it, but we need to see it through because right now it hasn't been moving in that direction as strongly as we'd like. A lot of people are working really hard. Angel and Ryan Gravel and Kathy Willard are a whole bunch of people that are really involved and engaged in trying to make sure that Atlanta lives up to its potential in the best way possible here. So fortunately, the More MARTA plan came out last week. They'll vote on it this week. And, it looks like we just may get a good chunk of that light rail transit into production. And that would just be monumental. I really do believe it. So some really interesting discussions and some fun stuff. So check it out and enjoy.
Hi, my name is Nikki Speak. Waving at the microphone. We're Nikki and the Phantom Callers, and I sing and write songs and play rhythm guitar.
Hi, I'm Anna Kramer, and I play bass and sing and just generally hang out.
My name is Aaron, and I play cats. I play lead guitar. I'm sorry.
He doesn't want to
Mostly
admit it.
play the fool, sometimes play cats, but right now I'm playing lead guitars.
All right.
Nice.
And not in attendance is Russell Owens, who plays drums.
Well, that's okay. We miss Russell.
We have to give him a
love
shout
Russell.
out.
We do.
Yeah, you gotta give him a shout.
And he's real good. We love him.
Yeah. Well, so you guys have been playing together since around
March of last year.
So you got a little bit of time under your belt.
Yeah.
So what brought this very professional crew together?
I've been wanting to do something on my own because I had a ton of songs that I've written over the past 20 years, and didn't really have a good vehicle for them and other bands that I was in. So I started asking around. I originally was looking for a guitar player, and I asked Damon Hare, who's a promoter for the Earl, and he said, I know somebody that would be perfect. and he mentioned Aaron, but then we didn't actually get together for like another year, I think, after that. So, and so that's really what started it. And I had done this a Leonard Cohen tribute with Russell, and I was telling him that I was looking for a drummer, and he's a guitar player because he was playing guitar with me at the Leonard Cohen event, and he was like, I'll do it. So, and then I'm already in a band with Anna Shanti, where I play bass and she plays lead, and I knew that she could play bass because she teaches lessons, and she's an awesome singer and just one of my best friends. So I said, well, I can't really do it with anybody else besides Anna.
Anna, were you just surprised by her saying you're one of her best friends?
No, I wasn't surprised. No. It's been fun because we've been in Shanti for, together for about 3 years or so. So we've been on tour together and played music in all, kinds of places. And so we already get along really well, and it was kind of a no-brainer because I've played with Aaron before, and my other band is Anna Kramer and the Lost Cause, and Aaron's the only person that's ever played with, sat in with us. He's the only person that's been allowed to play with us. So he sat in on some lead guitar years ago. So I'd already played with him, and then I'd been in a band with Russell called Air Pocket. So we had already played together. So it's like everybody I'd already played with.
It was just a matter of the worlds just aligning here. There's
exactly.
A bit of cosmic stuff going on.
Definitely. Yeah. And then it just kind of, I guess it just was the right time for that. So it felt good. It was good.
Just out of curiosity, what, between your band and your band and this band, and what makes this one different from Shanti or Anna Kramer?
Just the songs, the people.
Was it literally just, hey, I want to take it in this different direction, let's try to do something a little...
Yeah, I guess we all have a lot of different things going on. I also play bass in another band called Black Cat Rising, and they're all friends of ours too. And I think these days the way the music economy and the music world, you kind of have to do a lot of different things.
Got to diversify.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nikki's in Midnight Larks, and that's a whole different sound, kind of
surfy garage. But I think my philosophy is that everybody has something different to bring to the table, and even though I wrote, I'm like, this is a song that I wrote, and whatever, I'm always excited to see what my friends in my band want to do with it. And everybody has
how they
I'm just I love that. That's not what I was thinking. Russell comes up with really interesting creative drum beats, and then Aaron just does this amazing guitar solo, and I just like how it comes together. So I think that's one thing that makes it unique, is just that it's just the members, what everybody brings to the table is different than the other bands,
Yeah. And do you feel like it feeds a different part of your, I would guess it feeds a different part of your creative soul, you needed to get this out because you can't necessarily use that song for
right,
for that band to that band.
Yes, exactly.
And do you think, all three of you seem to be on the same page in that respect? It's not, sometimes it's about diversifying just so that you can make sure that you can keep making music and doing stuff. But is there something about it that maybe is partly the search for what's the next, or what's the bestest thing,
I would agree with that. Yeah, there's, because, we're all creative people, and I think if you're a creative person, you just have to get it out. You got to do something with it, or you'll go insane. So.
True, yeah, very true.
And some people start insane, and they still
I was going to say.
Or just use the insanity to your advantage and be a nice person,
Yeah. I think also it's nice to play different instruments, the fact that we play different, in Shanti, she plays bass and I play lead guitar, and then, in this, it's just been fun to play bass because I haven't ever.
Do you secretly, though, criticize her?
No,
when
absolutely
she's playing,
not.
That is not the way she should be doing that.
No, because I don't know how to play bass either. I just literally started with this band, so I play bass like a guitar player. Basically, I just kind of. Basically.
Well done.
My first bass joke.
Good bass pun.
Oh my god.
It's very bass humor here.
Yeah. But so it is nice to like do different things in different bands, basically, and not just be limited to. And it's kind of like I like doing my own songs in my own band. Well, I don't like saying own band, but you know.
It's got your name on it. It's
the
your own
thing
band.
with my name on it, but it's nice to do other people's songs because then I'm not like limited just to my own brain. You know, then it kind of just expands out from there. I can kind of, you know, yeah, I don't know.
No, it
Tricky answer.
makes perfect sense. Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
So, how long have you been playing in?
A long time.
Okay. That can be a good answer if you want.
I think I picked up the guitar when I was like 15, and I was terrible. And so I bonded with it more in my 18 to 20 is when I started playing like a lot of old country songs and just getting the rhythm going. Like Carter Family kind of, you know.
Was that music you were listening to, or was it just easier to play?
I started with the Stones and the Beatles and, you know, the
You worked your way back
Kinks.
with.
Yeah, and then I went, like I grew up with more like Linda Ronstadt, Emmylou Harris, and Willie Nelson, that kind of thing. And then I went back and, you know, and Patsy, obviously, and then just sort of started searching more and playing it. I think it was kind of like, yeah, I don't know. The more I played it, the more I got nerdy about it, and then I just fused the two, the rock and the country, a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll.
Little tip of the hat to Donnie Marie. Yeah,
there you go. Yeah,
your
you like
phrase.
that? I did wear purple socks in honor of Donnie.
Well, so what was your beginning like, Nikki? Was it similar?
Well, in a way, but I'm kind of different from them because I love guitar, but they're just so crazy about it. But for me, I did get a guitar maybe when I was 15, but it was more just as a vehicle to write songs, and I just taught myself chords. I taught myself chords.
You done turn yourself.
I've been trying not to turd myself.
And I never learned proper technique or anything. I was just like, it was more just like strengthening my fingers so they didn't hurt, you know, so I could learn these chords, and because I had all these melodies in my head and lyrics and things that I just wanted to do things with. So for me, that was more, it was just a vehicle for songwriting. But
Did you start with poetry as a kid, or did you say no? It's always songs.
I did. It was always songs.
Really?
Yeah, I never wrote poetry. I have a like a song journal that I've had since I was a teenager that's just full of everything. So it kind of looks like poetry, but they were always intended to be songs.
Was that because you sang a lot growing up?
Yeah, I grew up singing in church and
kind of gets in your
that kind of
bones.
thing. But I was always just too painfully shy to sing in front of people. That was something that was a long struggle, but I always liked to write songs.
But now you're just bold and brash, and you just like
No,
knocked down the
I'm
door. When
getting
you
there.
came in today, I was like, wow, watch out. Nikki's in town.
I'm getting better.
We all are, every day, right? And what's your path, Aaron? How'd you get here?
Well, I think guitars have always been around me as long as I can remember. I guess around maybe 9 or 10 years old was when I kind of decided I really wanted to learn how to play like a lot of the sounds I was listening to. And, you know, a few years before then I was flying around in a Superman outfit with a 8-track player of Led Zeppelin. You know, I had a...
What bad could come out of that?
Well, I was I used to really think I was Superman when I was maybe 6, 7 years old, and I would like really wear a Superman suit around the house, and when we left the house, I would put on a suit and tie over the top. Seriously, and this went on for a couple of years. I think my mom just thought I was like an actor, a cute little actor, but I was legit. I was like, this is what's happening. I was like, you know, I'm young, my superpowers have yet to develop, so we're cool. Like, my mom got this little red 8-track player that had the soundtrack to the Superman movie on it. And a lot of times I would fly around with the Superman movie. But then at one point, I spent the weekend with my dad, and he gave me this box of old 8-tracks. And it was all like Jethro Tull, The Doors, Led Zeppelin,
Nice.
you know, your standard
power
classic
70s,
rock
yeah.
radio, 70s, 8-track stuff. But for some reason, at that age, the one I liked the most was Led Zeppelin 2.
Gee, I wonder why.
You know, and I still like it the most.
Yes.
You know?
That was my first,
Yeah.
actually. My first Zeppelin moment was that album. That
Yeah.
was the one- yeah, that too was the one that was like, oh my God, what's happening?
Did you search it out or did somebody share it with you? Do you remember?
I don't know. I'm not sure when I first heard it. I think I did get the 8-track later, but that was a lot later. I had like a portable 8-track player, and so it separated the guitar parts, which is insane if you
Yeah.
ever get to experience that.
Yeah. Well,
'Cause
most
it's like
people
silent
don't.
on one side, and they're just like, ah.
Well, but they don't. You know, most people don't understand stereo anymore
Yeah.
because they don't. Not much is
Yeah,
really in
exactly.
stereo,
Yeah.
and people
True.
don't have systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, where you have the speaker set
They
up
just
so
have
that you
the
can
phone
appreciate.
Yeah.
speaker that's that
Yeah.
big.
It's a true point. I think that affects the way people even record and produce music now too, because they have that in mind. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like listening to Queen, and Freddie did so many different
Yeah.
tracks, and then he would record them
Yeah.
left and right. So if you've never heard, you know, like Bohemian Rhapsody from that original source, it's still awesome.
Yeah.
But when you hear it coming at you from different angles, it's kind of
Wow.
like, whoa.
Yeah, that's more a little
Yeah.
more trippy than.
Yeah, you get more
Although
of an
that song is
experience.
pretty
Yeah.
trippy.
Yeah.
In general. Can't really get it.
Yeah. So when you guys talk about this band, how do you? Everybody wants to know, right? What's the sound? What's the musical style? Do you have an answer, or do you just?
I think Nikki can answer
Well,
that. Maybe.
I mean, we're definitely a rock band we're a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll. It's the theme of the
It's
day.
got some twang.
But I think that there's a good mix of all those influences, some punk influences in there, just all rolled together.
I gotcha. Well, so what's the? Is there a plan? Is there a next level of what you guys are thinking of doing, or are you just trying to flesh it out and figure out?
Well, we definitely want to record a full-length album. We just put out our 7-inch that we recorded, and we're really proud about that. Just kind of wanted to have something out there for people to listen to, because just to get the ball rolling, instead of waiting to record a full-length. But so that's what kind of wanted to do that this fall or this winter, but we'll see. And just hopefully keep working hard and trying to get bigger and better shows and expand our audience and hopefully go on tour, all those fun things.
When you tour, would it be a regional thing? Do you try to just do around, something
Yeah.
within a few hours?
We'll
I
start
heard-
small.
Actually, I've been meaning to tell you. I heard there's this really cool club in Antarctica. We should try to do that this
Bring
weekend.
it on.
Yeah.
Did have a
As
good
soon as
crowd?
Yeah, they'll love us there.
Right.
We'll go anywhere, but I think we have to start, around just like smaller trips.
Yeah.
That's what we've been doing, just to start with everybody's schedules. But I mean,
Well,
I
that's
think
the
goal
big
at
challenge
least-
is getting everybody's schedule.
Right.
together,
Yeah, and
right?
we all
Yeah.
definitely want to be gone as much as possible. But we definitely need, I guess with the 7-inch we can tour and jump on tours and stuff like that. But also with a full length, I'm
Well,
sure
then you've
it'll
got
be even
something to
easier.
sell and
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hope you
So we're
do
sort of
next.
starting that whole. We're in the beginning of that whole process. So it's happening. We played a few festivals last weekend, the
Yeah.
weekend before, or is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Done some
we've
more
done
out
a
of
couple
town.
recently.
So it's been really fun to get out of town, and then on our drive back we can all DJ.
Yeah. We've been listening to a lot of George Jones
A
and
lot
Willie
of George
Nelson
and
and
Merle.
Yeah.
good,
Don't
all the
ever
good
forget
country
Merle.
music in the band.
Johnny Horton.
Yeah.
Jinx.
Mhm.
there you go. Well, if people want to learn more about, when you're playing and where you're going, what's the best way to do that?
Any social media vehicle really. Not so good at Twitter. I kind of forget about it, but Facebook, Instagram, and then you can go to our website, and we do bands in town, so it automatically updates the website. So if you're not on social media, you can find it there. You can sign up for a mailing list on the website. It's NikkiandthePhantomCallers.com. And then I do try to send out emails, because some people
Yeah,
specifically say, I'm never going to be on Facebook, but I want to see you play. So, but It's a lot to remember.
It's hard work. The business of being in a band is no joke.
It's full time.
It is, and that's not the fun part that you signed up for.
Yeah.
So,
You gotta make that part fun.
Like, I think the gig is sort of the payoff, like especially if you get in that mode where you're on the road a lot and you're driving 8 hours a day and you have to make sure that the van has maintenance and everybody gets fed and everything gets done and moving heavy equipment and everything. But those, 45 minutes or so that you're on stage are the payoff. That's the fun part. Hey, we get to do this now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then you start all over again.
Yeah, worth
exactly.
it somehow. Those other 23 hours.
Yeah.
It's what? It is. Yeah. Well, you get to talk about going to Taco Bell and all sorts of stuff.
I think we're pretty much a Taco Bell band, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of like our
It's one of them.
Anybody with Taco Bell out there, understand they are ready for the sponsorship.
Is anyone listening?
Yeah.
They do sponsor bands on tours. They give you, I think it was like $500 to go on tour if you ate at Taco Bell.
But then you can't. You're too fat to play on stage.
I
You
think
just have
Actually,
a
that's
chair
not
like
true.
you got in
For
here.
instance,
You'd be
small
fine.
portions.
Willie Nelson
Yeah,
did
fresco
a
stuff.
Taco Bell commercial, didn't he? Like
He did?
in the 90s or something. I think.
Wow.
At least Bill Hicks has a joke about it. So if Bill Hicks said so, it must be correct.
All right, I'm gonna have to look that up.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
having
having
us.
us. Jinx again. Kissed a lot of misters, but only loved one. Went back to kissing when the love was gone. 1, 2, 3, 4. Prodigal daughter, you've been around the world shaking your tambourine. You've had a good run. Going all those places that I've never seen. Where did you find yourself? Did you just find yourself alone?
I've had a good time wearing out this heart on my sleeve. Too much time drinking and going all those places that I shouldn't be. Well, now I found it's time to go home.
I've worn the floor down, walking back and forth over you. I've torn my hair out, praying to the sun and to the moon. You were my one true love, the flesh of my bone. Come on home.
I've had a good run, tearing through this world on my own, and I had no love. But mama, your girl's done grown old. I am lost and found. It's sent her to the bone.
Kissed a lot of misters, but only loved one. Went back to kissing when the love was gone.
Prodigal daughter, you've
Been around the world shaking your tambourine. Did you find yourself? Did you just find yourself alone?
All right, so my name is Angel Poventud. I've been in the city of Atlanta 20 years. I love to bike. This year my goal is 100 miles a week, which I'm actually on target, so that's pretty exciting. And I had an airline job for 12 years and traveled the world for free for 15 and a half years as a result of that airline job. And I really got to see a lot of cities like San Francisco and Amsterdam and New York grow up. I mean, I was going to those cities from before, for example, San Francisco had transit to their airport to now when they do. And so now that I'm at a railroad job where I'm kind of locked in with a 2-hour call to my hometown now of Atlanta, I want to see the city better. And I want to be a part of making the city better. And it's turned into what people think is my job, although it's my side gig. So, yeah, that's
Well, maybe
that's
it's
kind
your
of
passion.
That's
Okay.
the nut. Well, I thought I was going to be like engineer, civil engineer, architect growing up, and then school was not. I just didn't do school. Like, I tried to go to college and was trying to work full time and go to school full time and dropped out immediately. But I'm actually doing that work now, but in my free time, like city building, city
Right.
planning. I often tell people my Atlanta doesn't even exist yet. The Atlanta that I play in is the one that's like 5 years away from everyone else experiencing, because it's like so far ahead on the planning and the decision making and the networking and
The connections.
dot connecting,
Yeah.
all of that.
Well, so what got you, or what is it specifically that got you? Is it transit? Because I know we've talked a little bit, and Ryan Gravel, connected us because he said, when you look at the Beltline and you look at some of the things that we're hoping to do in the city, he said maybe you ought to talk to Angel because he's been looking at this a long time, and he knows a good bit too.
So it's, you think about, so my dad worked for an airline while I was growing up, and we had free flight benefits until I was about 15. And so I think just the way I experience time and distance is different than your average person. Like, we would go to New York for lunch.
Yeah.
From Miami. I would come home, living in Miami, I would leave the house in the morning and come home that evening and tell my friends on the block, oh yeah, we went to New York for lunch today. And they thought I was a lunatic. They thought I was making stuff up. But probably my whole life, like, time and distance and that connectivity, getting on an airplane for me is like getting on a bus.
Right.
There's no difference. And even growing up as a kid, like, I had a neighborhood that I could go bike out into, and if an ambulance went by, I had to go back to grandma's. So, like, it wasn't me in the ambulance, but like, I've always had this connectivity to my community, whether it's
It's more on a ground level, though. It's connected in a different way.
but it's
You're
every
grounded.
scale. But it's every
Yeah.
scale. It's like, it's almost like being able to see our cities from above and seeing that grid from an early age. Or
Right.
like, oh, this is all connected. Like,
Right.
these streets all connect. Even our cities are connected, whether it's via the airways or interstates. My mom's godmother lived about an hour drive away, and we would go see her up in West Palm Beach probably every other month or so. And so, Disney World, 4-hour drive. Like, I had this real scale
Yeah.
of distance and time and that connectivity. And yeah, when it's, when there's sidewalks and streets, you can get places. And
Yeah,
it's
we
easier
have
to get
options.
places. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think all those options, growing up a whole lifetime of all those options, and you're just like, oh, this is important. Like, we should have connections. And even, in my simple early walks on the Beltline, it was like, oh, these things are connected, but there's a fence in the way, or there's not a set of stairs. Like, let's just make the connection. And it's always been second nature for me to create those connections.
And so what do you think Atlantans are missing right now, whether from the ground level or from the administrative or political level, any of those things? What do you feel we're missing, or what's not connecting the dots, so to speak?
Big picture, like stepping all the way back, it's race. So growing up in South Florida, like the railroad is why there is a South Florida, much like Atlanta. And you had black communities all along the railroad that were the folks that built the railroad. But in some way, those communities, had to be integrated because they weren't on a side of town. They were along imagine Peachtree, and then every 10 miles there'd be a node of diversity because that node followed a straight line all the way down to the Keys. Here in Atlanta, it's a completely different scenario. You have a side of town. Our city is 55% black as of the census in 2010. It's a side of town. And so if you're on one side of the city, whether it be white or black, you rarely get to the other side of the city. And so we don't know each other. And we're not using each other's city. Part of my move from Midtown in 2000 and bought my house in Adair Park in 2011 and moved down in 2013. And part of that move was I want to use the whole city. I don't want to continue to use just half of my city. And so moving to the west side, living on the west side, grocery shopping on the west side, I think that's important. And I think when we don't use our whole city, we don't get to meet each other and interact. And it's probably one of the reasons the Beltline, we haven't said that word yet, but here it is.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that project has been so meaningful to me is that while I was, pre-Beltline, my life in Atlanta was all about Midtown and making Midtown better and living in Midtown and really investing all of that time and energy into Midtown. And as soon as the Beltline came on the screen, I was like, oh, I get to care about 45 neighborhoods now. And I'm not going to go just to my meetings in Midtown, but now I'm going to go to meetings in other neighborhoods because we're all connected. And
well, by definition, as a city, we're all supposed to be, on the same page.
We're supposed to be, but we don't use our city that way.
Yeah.
We don't use our city that way. And I mean, there's 250 years of history. There's federal, state, local laws that are no longer in place. But it took generations and decades and centuries to get into the mess that we're in now. And it's going to likewise take generations, decades, and laws on the federal, state, and local level to reverse the damage that's been done over the last decades.
Yeah. What do you... So what's your experience now from moving to Midtown to West Side? Now you've got a different optics, right? You're looking at Midtown from the outside on some level, and you're looking at all those transit patterns and all those, retail and social interactions. What do you see that you like about that? What do you like about the West Side? Not necessarily what they're lacking or what they haven't been given access to. Let's get positive here.
No, so when you think about our city, the biggest reason I'm still here is most likely our nature. That we have a tree canopy, that we're a city in a forest. I grew up, again, South Florida with an incredible diversity of trees. No leaves fell. They didn't, I thought of them all dying in the winter
once
here.
A year, yeah.
The appearance of death without leaves. Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida in 1992 and wiped out our tree canopy for 60 miles. There wasn't a tree standing for 60 miles in South Florida in either direction from Miami, 30 miles north-south. And so moving here in 1998 and getting my entire tree canopy back was really just phenomenal, dynamic, phenomenal. There's no way, I'd volunteer with Trees Atlanta now for 18 years as a result of that love and passion for trees. And so, Midtown has an incredible tree canopy, Piedmont Park. I lived on the park, next to Willie's. I was 5 feet out of the park, fourth floor balcony overlooking the park, eye level with the birds and the trees. I love our nature, and the fact that we're the least dense city of our size means that everywhere in the city has a lot of nature. I think 70% of our tree canopy is in people's backyards. So specifically, like living in Midtown, I had 5 grocery stores within a mile. You know, ease of access to the city. I would walk to the North Avenue MARTA station or the Midtown MARTA station, depending on. I lived on Piedmont Avenue for 12 years, up at 12th for 2, and then down at 3rd for 10. And so, like being in the heart of the city, like being where everything's happening. Again, Piedmont Park, you know, Pride weekend, I would park my car and not move it for 4 days. Like being where everything is happening and not having to go to where things are happening was the most important dynamic part of my life at that time. Like I would host potlucks at my house every Sunday in the park. We'd have like blankets laid out, and it was community building, but like really local, to where you didn't have to go anywhere to get what you needed.
Well, there's something about, don't you think there's something about the density that that area provides, that you're going to be shoulder to shoulder with people that you're either going to get along or find a way to get along too.
No, I mean, that's, everyone's there. I mean, it's, and, you know, we're losing a little bit of that, you know. So I didn't get to Atlanta until 2 years after the Olympics. And it was a big shift. I think of it as like a void in our creative class for a decade after the Olympics because of rents going up. So rents went up, the creative class left, so the gays, the artist, anybody that was, you know, part of that lower living scale, like lower income scale, lower paying rent scale, like all of that. And to a degree it got replaced by like a 9-to-5 corporate class.
Kind of like New York's doing right now in Manhattan, where they
I mean, and it's natural evolution of our cities. People don't want to live in the city; they move out. White flight. We're dealing with reverse white flight. It's not a Beltline thing. Gentrification wasn't caused by the Beltline. Every city is dealing with gentrification, and every city doesn't have a Beltline. But you know, it was that first round of gentrification. If you would think about people not wanting to live into the city, and then people moving back in to live in the core of the city.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you know, we lost. To kind of take a small tangent, so the gay community lost like 5 nightclubs in a very short amount of time due to that transition. So when Backstreet, Armory, I used to go to the Metro, which is up at 12th and Piedmont. You know, as these new buildings went up in Midtown and the density came, the gay community lost its churches.
Right.
Like the places that we go to drink, to meet, pre-apps. You know, it was a big blow to the communities that had been there as the gentrification of Midtown happened over a decade ago. And so, you know, housing is important. You need options. You have to have, the more housing you have, the greater options you have. And Midtown's been able to do that. You know, there's been a lot of interest in the in-town communities. The crash that happened, that we didn't have any housing created for almost a decade, has definitely affected the affordability of those communities.
Yeah.
And so.
But was that Adair? Did Adair Park, did that provide affordability for you in a different way?
Yeah. So
comes at a cost though, right?
So if we think about 2012, which is a pretty pivotal year. So the Fourth Ward Park opened in 2009, and then the East Side Trail opened in 2012 of the Beltline. In that year, the city had done a survey of vacant lots and properties of the, you know, it was a $300,000 study. It was a windshield study, but it was like the condition of our city today. It's called the heck's it called? I'll think of it. Yeah. But it's at the time on the East Side Trail from Cabbagetown, Reynoldstown to Midtown, Virginia Highlands, there were 167 vacant houses on the East Side Trail in 2012. On what we think of as the West Side Trail, Washington Park to Adair Park, there were 1,800 vacant houses. And so, you know, the East Side Trail was already at capacity and was dealing with a supply and demand problem, you know, 6 years ago now. Here we are in 2018. The West Side was not dealing with that. And so I found a property that had been abandoned for a decade and bought it for $14,000. And there was no bidding war, like no, you know.
The flippers weren't coming at you.
So those folks were a part of those communities back in 2004 and 5, pre-crash.
Pre-crash, yeah.
And then they lost their ass.
Yeah.
And they weren't coming back yet. They're back now.
Yeah.
But I mean, the reason being is that the west side of the city, the in-town core of the west side, had been disinvested in for 5 or 6 decades. So when the west side communities transitioned from white to black, the businesses left. So I mean, if you think about the State Farmers Market site is now currently in Forest Park down by the airport. It used to be in the Capitol View in the Oakland City neighborhood, which is opposite of Deer Park. But it used to be on the Beltline on the West Side Trail, the State Farmers Market site that the Beltline now owns and we'll call Murphy's Triangle when it gets developed, was an old State Farmers Market site. And so when this transition happened in our city from white to black in the core, the jobs left in a real way. Again, this disinvestment. Once all those jobs left, the infrastructure left. The railroad pulled up their rail ties and left. So if you disinvest in a community for 4, 5, 6 decades, there won't be any jobs there. There won't be any life. And so part of what drove me to the west side was affordability. When in 2009, when the Fourth Ward Park came online, I was looking at properties in Fourth Ward, and overnight they vanished from the market. So I could have bought a house for $45,000. They would have needed a little bit of work between the Fourth Ward Park and Boulevard. And the next day, when the fences came down, not a one of those properties was on the market.
Wow.
They just vanished because people saw value, and we live in an incredible market of capitalism and supply and demand, and if you're not ahead of that curve, you're going to get crushed by that curve.
Yeah.
And so part of me going west was affordability, but it was also I planted trees in those neighborhoods as part of a Trees Atlanta volunteer.
So you'd been through there some.
5 or 6 years before that. I had started doing walks on the Beltline in 2009. So by 2011, I was familiar with those communities. And I've been doing bike rides around the whole city since I got here. So I was already familiar with those communities from a pedestrian scale going back further.
So what do you find? I go back to my original question. What do you find about Adair Park from that area, from the west side? What is the positive? You can talk about the disinvestment, but what do you see now? Is there an inkling of a resurgence? Is there a community that you don't necessarily get in the same scale?
So understanding. So if you don't live in those communities, you don't understand how. I mean, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but you just don't understand to the degree that race has decimated half of our city. And if you think of the black community on a national scale, it's 12% of the population of the country. The 2010 census, MPUV, which is the MPU that Adair Park is in, it's Adair Park, Pittsburgh neighborhood, Summerhill, Mechanicsville, Peoplestown, High Point. They were dealing with a 40% poverty rate and a 20% unemployment rate, which means that 40% of the people that live in those communities make less than $12,000 a year as an individual. I didn't know that kind of poverty existed in our city,
so close.
In the core of our city.
Right. By our stadium.
So there was 80 jobs a day at the Braves Stadium, but then that stadium and the surrounding neighborhood sat vacant the rest of the time. The hardest moment for me was when one of the kids in my neighborhood, in pointing out the Beltline, and I was telling him, it's trails and green space and transit, and he said, are they building that for the white people or the black people? And that was really the moment that I was like, I have to re-examine everything. I tell people all the time, when you move into a community like Adair Park or on the inside core, the west side of the city of Atlanta, you're not creating a new community. You're helping stabilize and build a community that's been there all along. And it's really easy to show up and be like, I'm going to create a community. But you got to go.
You got to talk to the elders. You got to be part of it.
You got to sweep the sidewalk. You got to pick up trash. You got to trim bushes. You got to do that for about 5 years before the little old ladies on the street will come out and hand you a bottle of water and their broom and trust you. And if you just show up and think,
yeah, you're the great white savior,
you're going to change something overnight, you're nuts. And that's really what I've learned in the 5 years I've been living on the West Side, is that those communities are there. They haven't had any help from anybody. And the most important thing I can do is chip in. And whether it's, learning the kids' names on the street and making sure they know my name so that when they see me, they're like, hey, Mr. Angel. I'm like, hey, what's up? But also, giving back. So we have the Bearings Bike Shop in Adair Park that 500 plus kids have been through since it started a decade ago. That's our neighborhood patrol. Like, I was giving $300 a month to that in the early years of me being in the neighborhood, because that's the resources for our kids. And so it's investing in a neighborhood. Like, I'm investing in my neighborhood, but I'm doing so not just by buying a house that's increasing in value, but I'm doing so by working with kids, working with the nonprofits, picking up trash.
Getting involved.
Yeah.
You got to have real skin in the game.
Meeting neighbors, knowing neighbors.
And I think that's a challenge for some people, especially if they're. I grew up on the upper end perimeter, on the outside the perimeter. I always said I was from Atlanta, but I didn't know Atlanta at the time. Right. Then, granted, it was a different time. But if you're moving from a subdivision or from a suburb somehow, it's a different level of community. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, sometimes it's just you're not as connected because you've got a lot of space. When I lived in Cabbagetown, we could reach out our window and touch the neighbor's house. So you had to kind of know you found a way to get along. You
were going to know your neighbor.
Right. But I think people don't realize that's what in-town living, that's what a real community is about. When you move back in town and go, oh, yeah, this is going to be cool, I'm going to be in it. It's like, well, understand also you're part of that community. You get to choose if you engage, but don't be surprised if, you feel like an outsider if you don't.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the hardest conversations I've had in my house was we were talking about diversity and the importance of diversity. And, the question came up, like, why should those communities on the West Side be diverse? They've had safety in being together and not being broken up. And if you think about, Midtown and the gays living in Midtown and not being able to leave Midtown because it wasn't safe, and now all of a sudden I can move from Midtown to Southwest Atlanta because our whole city is safe and I don't have to stay where it's safe. But if you think about the black community and displacement happening on the west side of the city, there's a fear that there's been safety, even if there's no investment, there's been safety in not having diversity. And everyone, as our neighborhood becomes more white, people are more apt to call the police if something happens. And, white America has a very different experience with police than black America. And so, the notion of like, call a parent instead of calling the police, like, that's a real thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so, those are huge hurdles that I'm only now beginning to understand because I live on a side of the city that those things matter.
Well, but I mean, I agree with you 100% that that's the way. But I'll also say my experience has been that it's a changing mentality. It's where we come from a different time. My neighborhood where I live 15 years ago, police were in the neighborhood all the time. I mean, I remember the Dirty Birds flying in the neighborhood once a week and the spotlight coming through the yard. Yeah. And I mention that to neighbors now and they go, what? And I'm like, that's just the way it was. Yeah. But even then, if the teen 2 doors down was playing a stereo too loud at midnight, some people would say, well, did you call the cops? And I was like, no, I told them to turn the stereo down.
I knocked on the door.
And I think we've gotten our humanities disconnected for some reason, and nobody's willing to be human and flawed and the bad guy or the parent or the narc or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what? But that's what it means to be in a community.
Right.
That you need to know everybody.
Right.
And that's the crazy lady. Okay, so give her a little room. She's going to yell at you, but she's okay.
Yeah.
That's what she does.
Yeah.
And I think that's the saddest part. And I think that transcends race for me personally.
Certainly.
But unfortunately, it gets complicated, with race. Because you're the other if you are somehow different.
And I mean, that original thought of like, oh, I understand how somebody could not want there to be diversity in a community because of that fear. But we don't, if we don't live with each other and engage with one another, then we're not going to know. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to understand the plight that folks are actually dealing with if I'm not in those communities. And, it's hard. It's,
Well, and it is with a city the size of Atlanta, and especially if you want to be a good Atlantan and you want to be fair and equitable, you say, okay, I've got my existence and my challenges. I don't know your challenges, but at the same time, you don't know mine. So why I'm voting for X and you're not, maybe we need to come to the table and understand what it means in the long term. So going back to that kid's statement, do you think we're building the Beltline for the white people or for the black people?
I mean, today we're building it for a class of people that can afford to live in the city. And it's why housing, affordability, and transportation are the number one issues that I focus on every day of my life here in the city.
And everybody says affordability is one of the biggest challenges, and the Beltline's challenging the affordability. Do you believe that's because we haven't put the right pieces in place, as I believe Ryan said in the past, to make sure that we can try to save some of those, the diversity of income?
So the city of Atlanta and our elected officials aren't doing enough. And they're doing things. Andre Dickens doesn't get enough credit. He's one of our at-large city council members. He was able to get inclusionary zoning passed, I think, in the last year or two. But the problem is that it's really limited. So it's not the whole city. It's only the Beltline overlay, which is a half mile in either direction from the Beltline. And you've got developers and other West Side properties, so it's two pieces. But you have development now that's happening across the street from that half mile because developers want to make as much money as possible. Yeah. And so we have to we're taking steps. We as a citizenry have to demand more from City Hall. That's the only way this will improve.
How do you get everybody on the same page? That's the big challenge, though, isn't it?
So we thought we were there. The last election cycle, it was the number one issue. Affordability was the number one issue. And we got promises from our current mayor about, $1 billion investment in affordability. And a lot of us thought that was just campaign talk. And then she used that same $1 billion commitment in office. And so it's about accountability now. It's like, okay, you're, 8 months into your first year, you have a 4-year term. What are you doing to get us to that $1 billion mark? We won't be a city. We won't be a city for you and I sitting here at this table in 10 years if we don't correct this problem. Taxes will go up. The east side of the city is dealing with a tax obligation between $5,000 and $10,000 a year per house. The west side has no tax obligation. Like neighborhoods like Adair Park 10 years ago, up until the Beltline happened, were paying $25 to $100 a year in property taxes. As those taxes catch up, we risk displacing the entire west side of the city. But we also risk displacing the entire east side of the city.
Yeah.
Because nobody's income is increasing
At the same level.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
as our city ages, if you think about the Virginia Highlands, Morningside neighborhoods, those are neighborhoods that all were established at a time, and in another 10 or 20 years, most of the people in those communities are going to be on fixed income, and won't be able to deal with changes in property taxes like they might be able to today.
Right. Well, so the fact that right now the plan for the Beltline, though it's always been to have transit around it and to finish the whole thing, the transit is in flux as far as what's going to happen on some level.
But so just kind of going back to blame, like
Yeah.
where's the blame fall and who can fix this? It's city council. It's our mayor's office. The Beltline, as far as the landmass, if you think about the TAD, 6,500 acres, it's like 6% of the city is the Beltline. The city is the overseer of the Beltline.
Right.
The city is responsible for the other 94% of the city, the council and the mayor's office. If we don't have affordability being built, if we don't have greater housing options coming online right now, that's not the Beltline's fault. It's our city's fault, our city representatives, and our fault for not pressing the matter more greatly.
So do you feel that the housing needs to be, the affordable housing needs to be built as a preliminary to finishing the Beltline on some level?
We've got to pass the right kind of legislation so that if any housing gets built in the city, there's affordability built into it. So that a developer can't say, oh, well, I want to build in Atlanta because that's where the energy is at. But I'm not going to build in this special zone where I'm going to lose some of my market share.
Right.
And of course, the flip side of that is that if you make the entire city an affordable housing zone, then you might have developers that are like, well, I'm just not going to build in Atlanta. I'll build in Cobb County, Gwinnett County. And so, there's a balance there. But at this point, we've given up. Like the city's saying, development, do whatever you want, except for this special donut, if you will, zone around the Beltline and West Side zone. And we were hoping that the incentives to be in that zone were so great that the development would come into those zones and build affordability into those zones. And what we're finding is that there is development happening in that zone of inclusionary zoning, but a lot of the development's happening just outside.
Well, but don't you think also it makes sense that the logic of the Beltline not being completed, for some developers, they're like, yeah, I'm not going to be the pioneer on this. And the fact that what I keep coming back to is the most transformational aspect of there being transit on the Beltline. If that's not happening, you're killing the golden goose to some degree.
Yeah, I was just reading today, there's a new development going up on Boulevard down on the south side of the city, south of Grant Park. It's like 319 units. And it's pretty incredible. They're actually not doing a parking deck there. They're using surface parking. And the long-term benefits of that is that if you put a parking deck in the middle of an apartment building, you can't tear that down to create more housing. If you have a surface parking lot, as transit comes online, you can wipe out that surface parking lot and put more housing there. And so short-term, people think surface parking lot, nightmare, worst-case scenario, why are we doing this? It's land that's already vacant, so we're not cutting down a single tree to put in a surface parking lot. These are, these industrial zones that ring the Beltline are flat, some cases brownfield, in almost all cases treeless. They're full of kudzu.
Yeah.
So if you take out kudzu and put in a surface parking lot, that's actually an upgrade. And without putting in a parking deck, you're preserving that space for housing down the road.
Yeah.
But if without transit, then you can't have density because you can't. Our road network isn't going to expand to double the car usage in the city.
Yeah, for Boulevard, you put 300 units on that. That's insane.
When it's funny, we don't really think of it this way, but Adair Park has 450 houses. That's us. It's a small neighborhood. Midtown has 1,500 houses. But when a new one of these complexes comes online, you're adding a neighborhood to the city.
Yeah.
on, the Georgia Power site is talking about 800 apartments. You're adding a half Midtown to the city in a very small space.
You're just dropping it right in.
You're creating a brand new neighborhood.
Yeah.
And without a transit option, we can't do it without transit. We cannot double the size of our roads.
They put bike lanes on North Avenue. That's all you have to do, Angel.
So, okay.
It's going to be so easy to get by Old Fourth Ward Park to North Avenue to get wherever you're
going to need an e-bike on North Ave because there are some big hills on North Ave. Yeah. So, we need all the options, but transit needs to be one of them. We need bikes. I don't get upset about the bird scooters, the e-scooters. Right. We need all the options: cars, bikes, walking, light rail transit, the heavy transit. We have 100 buses in our 100 bus routes in our city that we take for granted, that we don't use.
Oh yeah.
We think of MARTA as a heavy rail system, and if you have the pleasure in our city to have a car, you don't think about a bus network. You don't think about a 15-minute interval or a 30-minute interval or a 45-minute interval on a bus network. Because we don't use that system, it's not the best it can be.
Yeah.
And, I have a Breeze card in my pocket at all times. I use my bike a lot, but I also get on the bus and I get on our heavy rail system, not just to go to the airport.
Right.
I use it to go to the
stadium.
mall. Yeah. If we don't use the system, we're going to lose the system. I mean, it's a use it or lose it situation. And we take it for granted. Right now there's a bus running down Ponce every 15 minutes. And people are like, "Oh, it's not convenient." It's like it's beyond convenient. Like if you can't leave your house and walk over to Ponce and get on a bus to go do the things you need to do, you should probably re-examine what you think about as convenient. Because again, if you don't support it, that bus isn't going to come down that corridor.
Yeah.
It's going to go somewhere where there is transit-dependent ridership. If you want to keep an option available, you've got to use the options that are there now, or you'll lose those options.
Okay, so how do we balance that with what the more MARTA plan is now for trying to re-energize Atlanta and connect Atlanta, and how that plays into the Beltline? And it is or isn't working.
We're at a critical moment. Like these next weeks. Like these next days even are when the decisions are being made. And,
And you won't get a second shot. People don't realize this, that it doesn't get made and then everybody goes, hold it. Now that's what you're talking about?
So
we need to change that.
October 4th is when, today we're talking is September 20th. October 4th is when the MARTA board puts into stone the decisions that are going to get made. And of course there's flexibility there. Things will change over the next 40 years. But it's really important what's on that list and what's not on that list. And it's going to be a lot harder to add things than it is to take things away. And so, the momentum that has been building with the Beltline Rail Now movement and, all the conversations around more MARTA at City Council, at the MPUs, the Beltline Rail Now network has an MPU map that's impressive. I think all but one of the NPUs that ring the Beltline around the entire city, not just white and black Atlanta separated, but around the entire city, has voted not to sign the petition in support. And there's one more MPU that I think their meeting is on Saturday, and hopefully we can get them to sign, and we'll have all the MPUs but one that ring the Beltline supporting the petition.
And the petition is?
To support the build out of the Beltline now, to put it on the plan so that it will happen over the next 40 years, and that in 40 years from now, we're still not missing 2/3 of the Beltline.
Right. Because right now, the Beltline's only 7-8 miles.
Yeah, there's
22.
We have a 22-mile loop, and we're going to build out about 7 or 8 miles.
And why do you think they chose that? Is it just...
So a couple of factors were in play. In 2016, we only owned that much of the Beltline. And so when we passed this more MARTA tax, and MARTA met with the city, when city council had their say, I'm sure
for the
the
T-Splosh.
conversation, not T-Splosh, but more MARTA.
Okay.
I'm sure someone at the city said, put all the transit you can on the Beltline, and we'll be happy with anything else. And we put that plan that we're looking at today has transit on all of the Beltline that we owned at the time. Nobody could envision less than 2 years later, we would have 6 more miles of Beltline that we own. And so that was a huge, missight, hurdle, missed opportunity.
Right.
That here we are less than 2 years later, we're finalizing the plan, and 6 more miles just showed up, 4 on the south side and 2 over on the west side. And, that wheel that got set into motion in 2016, it's really hard to undo that.
Yeah.
Since that city council meeting in 2016 and then the vote a couple of months later, planning has been going forward along that guideline, along those rails. And it's really hard to change that direction, overnight. But here we are at a moment where we now own more of the corridor. That if you think about where the money, so right now there's a lot of money. It's $2.5 billion over 40 years, $65 million a year that comes from a half penny sales tax that's being collected on top of the penny that we already pay. And we're trying to figure out how to use that. So it's bus improvements, high capacity improvements, light rail, BRT, bus rapid transit, and then arterial stuff.
Now, when people say bus rapid transit, what is that? What exactly is that? Like a dedicated lane?
Yeah, so bus rapid transit is separate than a bus service. Once you get to bus rapid transit, you're talking about a dedicated lane, signal prioritization, an upgraded bus type. So like, a slightly bigger bus, more comfortable, more frequency, a serious bus improvement. I think the number that I heard at last night's forum was it's $25 million a mile to build high quality BRT and $75 million a mile to build high quality LRT.
Well, if it's still a bus, why does it cost so much for that space? Is it on a track?
So no, but you've got to create barriers to keep others out.
Oh, okay.
And so it's in the road, but it's not just striping and paint.
Right.
It's saying you're not allowed here if you're not this vehicle.
I gotcha.
And so
that's where the cost goes.
Signage, ramps, the bus stations aren't just a bench or not even a bench, but you're talking about actual stations. So like, a platform and overhead coverage, because you're telling the communities that are using that system, we're investing in this transit for you, and this is high quality, a high quality investment. And in order for communities to trust it and not use a car and come to that system, you've got to do that above and beyond work to invest in those corridors that become BRT.
I gotcha. So you've got those things. You've got BRT and light rail and improved bus service, and then you have this partial transit around the Beltline. It almost feels like when I think about the partial transit on the Beltline, though, that seems like the one project out of all these, and I know there's needs everywhere. There'll always be those needs. But that one Beltline project seems to have the most transformational potential.
We're really, it's a like rock hard place kind of situation, because we, the city of Atlanta, the citizens of Atlanta that passed this tax, passed it because of the promise of the Beltline. It was the first slide on every presentation, Beltline, Beltline, Beltline. We've been planning on this now for, over 15 years. 2005 is when it was passed legislatively at the city, but Ryan and Kathy were out talking to communities as early as 2001, 2, 3, around there. The problem is that we've given our money to MARTA, and MARTA's charged with, moving people around and ridership and federal dollars, and they're not us.
Right.
They're not City of Atlanta residents. They're regional planners.
So if the city says we want this, MARTA can still say, okay, we understand.
Yeah, because it's
taken.
I mean, it's kind of harsh, but my analogy is that we gave the bully our lunch money, and now we're asking for a snack, and they're telling us it's not your turn yet. We have other priorities, and you getting a snack isn't one of them. And so, when you look at the Clifton Corridor, which is where a lot of money is being planned to go, it wasn't part of the city when we voted. Even now, as it's been annexed, the line that goes out to Emory, part of that line goes through DeKalb County, unincorporated DeKalb County. And City of Atlanta tax dollars are scheduled to be used to pay for that. That's not fair. Mm. And the argument from the Clifton Corridor Emory folks is like, well, the Beltline doesn't have any ridership on it today, because if you think of the South Side Trail, nobody lives there today. But Emory Clifton Corridor has plenty of people that would use transit today and would qualify for federal dollars today, so we should build that today. And the greatest concern is that if we spend $500 million of the more MARTA money to build out that Clifton Corridor, when density shows up to the South Side Trail tomorrow, I mean literally tomorrow, like again that article that I read today about 319 units coming to the Beltline at Boulevard, in 10 or 20 years, when there's density on the South Side Trail, if not sooner, there still won't be a plan to put transit on the South Side Trail for over 40 years. Yeah. And we can't wait that long. And so paying our fair share of the Emory Corridor, which is the part of it that was in the city of Atlanta when we voted, which would be about $250 million, put that money aside, wait for DeKalb County to pass their transit improvement tax so that we can match that with them. Right now, the Hamilton Road Corridor has 2 service modes that will get built out over the next 40 years. A full BRT system, and then that full BRT system gets torn out for a full LRT system. If you do one project, and the Hamilton Road Corridor is the only corridor in the entire MARTA plan that has 2 different modes funded over the next 40 years. If you do one of them, whether it's LRT or BRT, high quality, and then don't do the other, you're saving over $100 million. If you do an LRT system and don't do BRT, you save $100 million. You take $250 million from Clifton Corridor and $100 million from the Hamilton Road Corridor. That's $350 million that builds out at least the South Side Trail, if not the full Beltline. And so it's on paper, it's easy.
Right. You can sit down and you can.
But, again, this wheel that started moving in 2016, we're trying to turn the Titanic. We really are. We're saying, hey, iceberg.
Right.
And
But it takes more voices. It takes more citizenry. I mean, that's the reality. Nobody changes anything if the wheels
and
not squeaky.
citizenry is hard.
Yeah.
I mean,
busy, man.
we haven't even.
Angel,
we are not busy. We are not busy.
I've got American Idol to watch.
So yeah, so this is one of my favorite statistics. 98% of Americans own a TV and are watching 35 hours a week, on average. There's 2% that don't own TVs, and those 2% are the me's, the people that are like being entertained by things outside of the house,
right?
Whether it's a meeting or.
So how do we engage the people then? That's the real challenge, right?
We need the 98%, to turn the TV off for a moment. Like, don't throw it out the window.
Right.
But just turn it off for a moment and call somebody. And it doesn't have to be a council member.
Right.
Call your neighbor. Call somebody at Emory. Call somebody somewhere that can help move this needle.
How can? What do you think? If you're trying to speak to someone who's new to the whole concept, the majority of people think of the Beltline as it's a very vague concept to them anyway. If they've not stepped foot on it, it's even less. But once they've been on it, they think, oh, it's a promenade. It's really nice. When I've mentioned to people, this is supposed to have transit running alongside. And they're like, oh, don't destroy this beautiful Beltline. It's like, no, you missed the whole point of it. Yeah. It's still a promenade. You still get that. Yeah. But now you get more.
We really do need to figure out, somebody needs to come up with some cash and do like a 200-foot prototype of, because when we're out on the Beltline today, especially the East Side Trail, you think, oh, there's not enough space here. Like, we don't have enough space. If you're, near Ponce, behind Home Depot, Whole Foods, all of that, what you're looking at as slope and green space, and people are running or biking, off trail, kind of in that no man's land over to the side. People think that's all the space that's there, but there's like another 30 or 40 feet of slope that goes down to a retaining wall that's behind Home Depot and Whole Foods. That's the Beltline property. And so you build a retaining wall up from that base, and you put 2 vehicles out there on rail. And you're like, construction companies do it. When they're going to build a building, you have to do a little test wall
Right.
that the inspectors can come out and see all the layers. The smartest thing the Beltline can do, and I don't know if it's going to take, dealing with our philanthropic community to get it done, is a 200-foot test section that shows this is where the retaining wall is. This is where the transit goes. This is what the track's going to look like. This is what the vehicles will look like here in corridor with the overhead wires and everything. Like, I think we need to do that.
Yeah.
Because without that visual, people are like...
They don't have the vision.
People still think today that we're going to put transit on top of the trail. I don't want to see transit on the Beltline because I enjoy the trail. And they actually think...
Yeah. It's not going to be beside it, it's going to be on top of it.
Transit on the Beltline means a train goes on top of the trail.
But you're right, though. They visually, they don't understand where the landmass is. I mean, there's not the typical orange or yellow spray paint on the side that say, here's your property line.
Right.
And so if you start to see that property line, you're like, oh, okay. And the fact that just because what we have now on the trail doesn't mean that's the ultimate, the end product. It can shift to the side. It can be a different, tarmac, whatever. But, that's the biggest challenge I find is trying to explain to people that the whole reason for the trail is so that we can have the opportunity to get different ways, different places.
And it's an investment in transit. So when we built the East Side Trail, we built it at the cost of $6 million a mile. Really limited access. We had to take some shortcuts as a first piece. It was like, proof of concept. And so, like, at Ponce, we don't have access yet. At North Avenue, we technically don't have access yet. There's a set of stairs that Jamestown built with Ponce City Market. But Ralph McGill only has stairs. North Avenue does not have access. Well, North Avenue just got stairs. But there's limited access now. But when we built it, there was no access. Oh, yeah. The West Side Trail, we built at a cost of $15 million a mile. Full access. Every street has a ramp, and one of them has ramp and stairs. Every connection, every street. And these corridors are prepped for transit. So the East Side Trail, we built the trail to the outside of the corridor so that transit could go on the inside. We replaced, the Ralph McGill Bridge has a pedestrian bridge next to it because the original Ralph McGill Bridge is the transit bridge. Over on the west side, same thing. The Martin Luther King Bridge was replaced with a transit bridge. And so we've already invested in transit on the trail, but we don't see it because, that space that's over on the side just looks like green space. Yeah. But it's been graded. It's been, in some cases, there are retaining walls. It's been prepped for transit. And so by not putting transit there, we're actually throwing away the investment that we've already made by building the Beltline. The Beltline isn't a trail and an arboretum. The Beltline is all of the pieces are trail, arboretum, green space, transit. And so, again, when we think about the Clifton Corridor, Emory University line, they don't own any of the property that they want to put that light rail line on. And it's going to be, land acquisition.
Which takes a long time, as we know. We've seen it with the Beltline.
Like, we own the land of the Beltline. Yeah. There's no easement. Right. There's no eminent domain. There's no court cases. Yeah. We own the land. Like, it's insane. You can't get a more shovel-ready project than the Beltline. But yet, there's this idea that, in our leadership, that it's not going to happen. We're not ready. And if we're not ready, then nobody's ready.
Yeah.
We're more ready, and by the time we start to build these pieces, the East Side Trail's already there with density, but South Side Trail, West Side Trail, the density is coming.
Oh yeah.
This again back to City Council, the mayor's office. We need to have affordability built into all development in the city, so that developers aren't picking and choosing where they want to build to make the most amount of money. Free market is great, but you got to have some guardrails on the thing, or it comes off the tracks.
Yeah.
Which is what we're dealing with now. Is that we're trying to build in affordability into this thing, but we're doing it piecemeal, and it's not working because we're not going all in.
So what I'm hearing from you, Angel, is there's a two-prong approach possibly that citizens need to figure out. One is the affordability aspect, and that is through your political officials. That's through your city government. And that's where you have to, if you don't write, email, call, or knock on their door, they're not going to know you care.
Right.
But the city's the one who has to handle the affordability issue and handle how that land around the Beltline gets developed in the best possible way for long term, so that you can have an artistic class. You can have young folks move into town, and it's not just all single stockbrokers, maybe.
Right.
And then the other prong is people have to get involved and have to talk to MARTA, as well as other officials, as well as neighbors, to say, look, this is what we need, but you've only got 2 weeks. We've got till October 4th. Now, granted, there'll always be projects afterwards.
Right.
But keep this in mind, that if you don't talk now and you don't like what you see in 3 years, that's why.
Yeah. I mean, right now, it's right now.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got it as clear as it can be.
Yeah. I've got the mud as clear as it gets.
No, that's where we're at. That's where we're at.
Yeah. Are you hopeful?
I mean, my core is always optimistic. I'm an optimist, but I'm not hopeful. Like there's a lot of institutional baggage that's in the way. And
there's probably a few more voices of moneyed landowners or somebody individually who's got a little
it's
more
not
pull
even
than
that
you
complicated. It's like I wish it was that complicated. It's like it's just people have got a set thing and it's in motion, and it's really hard to change those.
Yeah.
Change something that's in motion. And we're trying to make a big change here. We're trying to take, so part of this is still political. Like MARTA has to be political. They don't have if we think about, so it's something I just realized. So MARTA brings in $400 million a year in 1 penny sales tax from DeKalb County, Fulton County, and Clayton County. City of Atlanta also chips in another half penny. So they bring in $400 million a year from those 4 funding sources. They bring in about $150 million a year in fare box revenue. So $550 million a year is what we're talking about. We're talking about, I think the city's budget, City of Atlanta's budget, is something like $600-700 million a year. So we're talking about an entity as big as, financially, the City of Atlanta, but nobody's elected. Yeah. Everyone's appointed. And so if we're not happy with city government, we vote those people out of office. If we're not happy with county government, same thing. But we're dealing with an entity that's as powerful as a city government with no accountability. And that's, I've just now started going to MARTA board meetings as part of all this more MARTA, and I'm like, oh, like it's a big room. There's a rope that you can't go past. There are computer screens in front of everyone's face, and you can't see them if they don't want you to see them. Like they have to poke around the computer to actually make eye contact with you while you're sharing your grievances with what they're doing. That might be a problem.
Yeah.
Like that we're not electing people on that board. And that they're appointed.
Are they just appointed by state or city?
They're appointed by a little bit of everybody. It's like, so the City of Atlanta, the mayor, 3 appointees are from the City of Atlanta, and they are appointed by the mayor. But county appointments, state appointment, like there's all kinds of people on that board. We don't know who they are. It's not like they're a city council member that you know their name and you can call them. You can't even email those board members.
No, I've tried that.
Like we just now got an email address. It's
a generic one.
It's
though.
it's like
info
marta.board at
Yeah.
it's marta.com. It's either marta.board or board.marta. Try one or the other, and whatever bounces back, don't use.
Yeah.
But like that's it. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's unconscionable that like these people, you know, the folks that are running MARTA,
Right.
the board, have no accountability to their ridership,
Yeah.
much less. And again, MARTA's constituency is the ridership,
Right.
and so they think in this generic one, like when they think about their mission, it's the rider,
Right.
and not City of Atlanta rider, Clayton County rider. You know, it's a regional MARTA. It's a Metro Atlanta Regional Transit Authority.
Authority.
Like
That's right.
it's the region, and that's their charge. But there's a massive disconnect when City of Atlanta residents say we want X Beltline, and I mean they did an outreach study in 2017 for more MARTA, and they got a result they didn't like. 26% said build the full Beltline first, and then 20% said build the Clifton Corridor, and by that number second, and then bus improvements was number 3 when people were asked like, of
Of the project.
the high capacity stuff.
Yeah.
So people wanted more bus improvements. Period. That was the comments. Better buses. But MARTA buried the study. It had to be an open records request to get that study because they didn't want the public to see what they did not want to do. You know, if they go after the feds for money and they say we want to put this Beltline in where there's no ridership today, the feds would laugh them out of the room. Versus, you know, they go to the feds and like say, hey, we want money for the Clifton Corridor because that's where the ridership is today, and they get the money. And so MARTA scrapped that study, did a whole brand new one to get a different result. They didn't even put the full Beltline on there as an option. They were just like Clifton Corridor or these pieces of Beltline. And they're like, oh, look, Clifton Corridor outperformed the
Right.
2 pieces of Beltline that were on there. It's insane.
Well, where does the Clifton Corridor actually? What is that?
Clifton Corridor is complicated.
I was
So
going to
the
say
Clifton Corridor
'cause it's
leaves.
going from Lindbergh. Isn't
It
it?
leaves the Lindbergh MARTA station. It will go south along Armour Yard. We need a new bridge under Piedmont Avenue. We need to negotiate the space underneath underneath the 85 interstate, which is where the fire just happened.
Right.
And there's actually some pinch points under there that don't make, I went under there the other day, my freight train goes under there. Like the original 85 that was built has support pillars that run parallel to the rail corridor, but the 85 expansion, which is what we use today, the big thing, has bridge supports that run 45-degree angles to the rail corridor. So the avenues of space are not logical.
Yeah.
And I went under there, I was like, uh-oh, like this is going to cost a lot of money. Like
Yeah.
it's not something that can't be figured out, but it's
Right.
not straightforward.
And it's not free.
We need to go underground. We're going to go underground starting around Lenox Road and stay underground near, the Zonalite area. So we're like cut and cover tunnel. We need a new bridge at Briarcliff because that bridge can't support transit down there. And then we go back underground at CDC, Emory, and stay underground until we pop out at Clifton and Haygood on the other side, away from the city of Atlanta of that whole site out there. of
The
Clifton.
Emory.
Yeah. And so it's 4 miles of like cut and cover tunnel, and
That's a lot.
there's a station at Briarcliff and there's a station at Cheshire Bridge, but there's no trail network that's being built alongside it. So you think about the Beltline. Not only can you get there from the neighborhoods, but there's a trail there, so you can actually get between stations in that space of the corridor itself.
You can get on a bird. You can get on a bike.
Board,
do whatever
bird,
you want.
walk, whatever you want. Like the Clifton Corridor is not going to have that. The Clifton
Right.
Corridor, like if you don't get on at Lindbergh,
It's like the train.
it's the train.
It
Yeah,
is the train.
it's Lindbergh, Cheshire Bridge, Briarcliff, and then Emory. Like those are your stops.
Right.
And there's no trail, there's no arboretum, there's no art, there's no any of that stuff. Like all the things that we think about for for the full build out of an amazing project are not there. But it still cost, $200 million a mile, something crazy.
So if somebody were looking at it from the outside, if they were looking at a map on this and they say, well, that looks to be a great connector for folks maybe that work in the CDC Emory area, and I mean, huge amount of people, researchers, doctors, and folks of that nature that can then go north, because it doesn't go any further south. It doesn't connect. It doesn't connect to the east-west line or anything else.
Right.
So it's a terminus.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, DeKalb County, if they ever chip in their half penny, it will go all the way over to the Avondale station on the east-west line. And even there, you have like massive controversy because it needs to go down, a roadway. That's
just the land,
right?
Yeah.
They're talking about taking away 30 feet of people's front yards on both sides of a road in DeKalb County in order to expand it further.
Yeah,
and people are, and it's historic neighborhoods, and they're losing their minds.
Yeah. All right, so we solved it, right?
It's fixed.
This is so easy, man. They should have just had us do this earlier. The key is that you got to contact your city government official and say, let's get some affordability ideas in here. And you've got to reach out to MARTA, friends, neighbors, whatever, and say, we really could use that transit on the Beltline as a priority. Mm-hmm. And or find Eddie Warbucks to come in and chip in to make it whole.
Yeah, that's all.
Sounds awesome. Thanks for chatting, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. Weren't they great? I mean, Nikki and the Phantom Callers love their sound, and such sweet, wonderful people. So check them out online. Go see their shows, buy their music, and get involved in the city of Atlanta if you're in this area. If you don't know about it, look it up online and learn what some creative thinking can do for a city. And I've interviewed Ryan Gravel in the past about this, so you can look through past podcasts and hear his vision when he created it as a senior thesis. But it's good stuff. So hopefully we keep engaged, and as citizens we all have a perfect world being created around us. So obviously you can go online, check out past episodes. You can sign up on Facebook, get me all friended, send you emails, give me an email, let you know about the next live show. Looks like we're aiming for December. And, otherwise just tell some friends about it, just spreading the good news of music, arts, and change makers in Atlanta and the South. So love to have any insight. Do you know anybody? Got any suggestions? Email me. Drop me a note. Otherwise, be a good neighbor, go hug someone, and I'll talk to you next week.